Well, hello there, and welcome to my channel. I am Nakyomushi, and today is Hyunjin from Stray Kids' birthday. Happy birthday to our lovely Pisces Versace Prince. In honor of him being an artist, I decided the perfect way to celebrate his birthday is with a watercolor painting tutorial using a sketch of the prince himself as the subject of my drawing. Especially because I just recently finished 59 watercolor pieces inspired by photos I took at Stray Kids Dominate LA. The full video is on my YouTube, so please give that a watch after this video if you haven't already. Coincidentally, one of the best pieces from that collection is of Hyunjin. First things first, let's go over materials. I'll show you what I use, but I do want to preface this with something. Something I have learned being a self-taught artist is that the majority of the tutorials I watch tend to teach me about techniques and materials that don't work for me. And I find that a good thing. You have to find what works for you and understand why or why not. As an example, I love Gretel Lusky. She is one of my favorite artists, but I would sooner fly to the moon than draw line art the way she does. Your girl loves clean line art, what can I say? However, that makes me respect her that much more as an artist because it's something I wouldn't do personally, and yet she makes it so beautiful. Your style and technique evolve as you learn more and become more comfortable with your craft. That's the way it should be. If you're watching this as a beginner artist, I suggest buying good materials to start off with, but don't buy the most expensive thing on the market before you are familiar with that medium. You don't want to bite off more than you can chew. Buying a good starter kit rather than scraping up random art materials that are cheap will make learning draw or to paint or whatever easier. Don't beat yourself up if something doesn't work for you though. That's part of the process. It doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you or your art. It's all a learning experience, and that's what makes it so fun and exciting. Don't be afraid to mess up and make something you're not 100% happy with. Those drawings can be some of the most important because they teach you something. I encourage you to look at those mistakes as a learning opportunity rather than something to feel embarrassed about. Those mistakes and failures lead to your greatest triumphs. I hope you find that helpful. For this art piece, I am using a Rendr Crescent mixed media drawing book, and I actually recommend this book to every artist. It truly is no bleed through, and you can use basically any medium you can think of on it. Binder clips, note about that, the paper will warp while you're painting, especially with watercolor. The binder clips help negate this and keep the paper from warping enough while you're working on the piece so you can finish it. If you have to hold the paper down while you're painting, it makes it difficult and demotivating because your energy is divided into trying to paint while you're also trying to keep the paper from behaving unpredictably. So make sure you have some various different sizes of binder clips. The paint I'm using is Kuretake Gansai Tambi, their 48 watercolor set, Blick Essentials Value Brush set, Assorted brushes, brown Nylon set of 12, and then two random ones my mom gave me. They are from Finenolo 0 and 00. You'll also need a dedicated small container or cup for water, preferably not a mug because you will accidentally drink out of it. Speaking from experience here. And a paper towel. It would also be helpful to have some plastic lid or palette next to you to help mix colors and lower opacity while you're painting. As a side note, I prefer to use toned paper in my sketches and paintings. My favorite watercolor paper is Finenolo Watercolor Toned Beige, but currently I don't have any more watercolor paper because of my 59 watercolor pieces I just finished. Full video on my YouTube channel. I think warm brown toned paper gives a nice feeling to your sketches and paintings, and I also like to use gray toned paper as well. Here is the sketch I'll be painting today. Hey look, it's next to the drawing I did for Han from Stray Kids' birthday last year. Another video on my channel you could watch. The reference photo is from one of Hyunjin's lives. I found this image on Twitter, I think. I chose it because of the sunflowers and the way the tones are a little bit muted. It reminds me of Vincent van Gogh, whose birthday is actually in 10 days. I actually did this sketch a while ago, almost a year ago. Yikes. But this particular drawing book has a lot of unfinished drawing and sketches. Maybe I'll finish them one day, who knows. Before I even get into where to start when painting, there is a concept every artist should have some sort of introduction to and understanding of, and that is lighting. Art is all about training your eye to see, then interpret and create. Let me show you an example of my art right before I learned about shading, and then a piece I made directly after. That's one hell of a difference, and dare I say, level up. Shading is important because it tells you what is a shadow or highlight versus the actual color of something. Once you understand shading, you can then start to differentiate the actual shape of something. The definition of a shadow according to Google is a dark area or shape produced by a body coming between rays of light and a surface. So let's look at some shading in the reference image. There will always be shadows under your eyebrows, between your lips, under your nose, under your chin. You see where I'm going with this? Basically anything that protrudes out and in front of something will create a shadow on the object below it. Highlights are very simple, but are often the cherry on top, if you will, and complete a drawing. The definition of highlights according to Google is a bright or reflective area in a painting, picture, or design. They show light reflection in a drawing. Those tend to be in the center of the highest point of a feature. Think of it as the lightest part of the object, and that can help direct you where the shadows go, or where the shadows fall, if you will. If you want a full tutorial on shading, let me know in the comments. When it comes to watercolor paint, you always want to start with the lightest colors in whatever layer. Water can be unpredictable when painting, but it also takes the path of least resistance. So if your paper has a divot or is a bit crinkled, it will settle in the creases rather than sitting on top. The nice thing about watercolors is even after they have dried, you can reactivate them simply by getting them wet again. And if you make a mistake on the paper, you can simply lift the paint off with a paper towel as long as the area is still wet. The more water you add to the paint, the less opaque it will be. The more paint you layer on the brush along with the water, the more opaque. It is possible to be precise and layer watercolor on to be opaque, but if you're looking for precision and opacity, I would recommend acrylic or oil paints. Watercolor, in my experience, is much more about the feeling of a piece or a moment rather than recreating it as exact as possible. Learn to trust the watercolor. Your tools treat you as well as you treat them. Taking care of your tools and trusting your own ability with them will help you tremendously when creating your art. The first step when using watercolor is to paint from the bottom up. Think of it as breaking down a drawing into layers. The base layer of a person is their skin. So I like to start off with painting their skin because that will be covered up by clothing. Well, most of the time. And if you were hoping to draw unclothed people, this is the wrong tutorial for you. Everything builds off of the skin. When painting the skin, I like to notice where the highlight is in the reference image, assuming there is one. If there isn't, imagine where it would occur. And leave that part unpainted if I can. It'll make it easier when adding the highlights, especially if you don't plan on using acrylic markers or gel pens at the end of the drawing. The next step would be to paint the clothing, starting at the shirt and pants and then any accessories over the top if there are any. For example, if someone was wearing a vest over their shirt, I would color the shirt first and then the vest. And yes, I am humoring you in this particular instance. His shirt is white. I would not paint a white shirt on white paper, but I also am used to toned paper. So let's all just play along and pretend, because I'm trying to be as helpful as possible here. The next step is to fill in the hair. I mean, find the base color. There isn't really much of a trick to hair until you actually start filling in the shading and whatnot. And then after you do the hair, I do the face. However, it doesn't really matter the order that you do that in. I mean, honestly, after you do the skin, you could do the facial features. It's kind of up to you. But I like to do those last because I find them to be the smallest details, and then that brings all of my coloring together. Here's an important tip with watercolor. You see how the middle part of the lips is not very opaque, but then it looks like it's just a really harsh line on the outside? That's because I got that area too wet, or maybe there was too much water on the brush, and the paint settled on the outside of it. The way you can fix that and get rid of that weird harsh line is by getting your brush wet, not too wet, and just start blending it out. You see, that's exactly what I'm doing right here. Remember, water follows the path of least resistance, so if you've got a big water drop on the piece of paper, the paint is gonna settle on the edges of it. So just use your water, your paper towel, and your patience to blend it out. It's gonna end up adding to the color palette and the intrigue of the piece in the end. After your base colors have been established, I like to add blushing on the skin. This tends to be in the cheeks and sometimes on the bridge of the nose. It's also on the knuckles of the hand, the elbows, and sometimes on the chest near the heart area. Just kind of notice where it is in the reference image, but you can also take some liberties with that. I mean, I have no problem drawing a very blushy boy, what can I say? And for example, I noticed that there was a fair amount of pink in this piece in the reference image, so I thought, okay, it's kind of under his eyes and more on his lips, so, I mean, that kind of counts as blushing. I don't know, any sort of pink is my next step before I formally get onto the shading. After that, add shading to the face and then to each subsequent layer. I like to use brown for the skin, but part of stylizing a drawing can be using a uniform color for shading. If you want to use a dark purple for all your shading, go for it. There can be several degrees of shading depending on the lighting. I tend to do 1 to 3 layers of shading, beginning with the lighter shade first. I especially do this in clothing folds to help convey the depth and the fact that I'm drawing or painting fabric. I count the flowers as the topmost layer of Hyunjin in this piece, therefore I'm painting them last. Please take note of the murky swamp water. Just make sure you're rinsing it out and getting new water fairly frequently, because that swamp water will get into the rest of your paints and that's disgusting. Same procedure for the flowers here. Remember, the lightest color first, then you layer on your next darkest color and then the shading. Pretty self-explanatory, and also flowers are kind of boring, so I'm done talking. After the figure has been completed, we then draw the background. If we were thinking in terms of layers, the background is the base layer, but since it's not the focus in most drawings, it goes last. It would not be ideal to take away space from yourself by drawing everything around the figure first. It leaves less room for fixing any problems that could arise on the figure. When filling in a background, tackle the smallest objects first. Once you do the base colors of all the objects, then fill in the shading and highlights. Once all shading is complete, add highlights. This is a very simple step, but it makes a noticeable difference on the final piece. It tends to be a few simple dots, but those dots help draw your eye in. I must point out though, depending on the lighting and the piece, adding that last bit of highlight could potentially take away from the drawing. Let me give you an example with some of my work. The background was more of the focus here. That's why I didn't feel the need for a catch light, like in his eye or something. But then with this piece, the catch light is what added and elevated it to something that's one of my favorite pieces to this day. And then the extra little bits of light that I added in the background and on his shirt. But part of that goes back to this idea of interpreting what's in front of you and the reference image, or what's in your head if you're not using a reference image. In the reference video here, the thing that stuck out to me the most was the sparkle and the twinkle of everything. So that's how I interpreted it. In other words, trust your gut and try it. Whatever sticks out to you is what you want to highlight. All right, friends, we did it. We made it to the end of this watercolor painting tutorial. What do you think about the piece? Here are some of my thoughts. This is not the best paper to use. It's obviously more ideal to use watercolor paper, but I'm still really happy with how this looks. It gives that more painterly feel that I think Hyunjin would appreciate. I hope you found this tutorial helpful. Let me know how you feel in the comments, and if you end up using any of these tips or tricks, please tag me. I'd love to see it. And also let me know if you don't use them, because that's equally as helpful. Anyway, happy birthday to Hyunjin. I love you, and I'll see you on the next one.